I remember going in the woods behind our home as a child with my brother and cousins and climbing the fallen trees, and you could just spend all day and into the evening and sometimes into the night out there, and you just felt safe, and it just have that atmosphere that you don't find anywhere else in the world.
Pam Lauser is from a small town called Gladstone, just outside of Escanaba in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Around here, spending time in the woods is a way of life. But it's not just camping and deer hunting that draws people to the forest. Logging and the wood products industry are big business in the UP, and they drive the local economy.
If you drive the highways in this area, you're bound to run across some big logging truck on its way to the mill. So there's an awful lot of employment in the woods.
Local workers harvest the trees, transport the logs to mills, and even work in factories, producing everything from paper to floors of NCAA basketball courts. But all this logging and manufacturing is nothing new. The timber industry has been a mainstay of Michigan's economy for nearly 2 centuries.
Originally, there were just some men who went out and chopped down trees. White pine, of course, was the tree they were really after through most of the 19th century.
By 1869, Michigan was producing more high-quality white pine than any other state in the Union. Lumber of all types from Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas was shipped across the country, building homes and hardwood floors in Chicago, railroad ties throughout the Midwest, and of course, paper.
This is a picture of my grandpa and my grandma. I come from a big family. My grandparents had 15 kids, and of those 15 kids, I'd say at least 12 or 13 of them have completely supported their families due to the logging industry. And without that, I'm not sure what a lot of them would have done for a living.
Many families throughout the Great Lakes region made their livings from the forests. In Michigan, millions of pine trees, worth more than all the gold in California, were clear-cut. And after a century of industrial logging, the once massive forests were reduced to a fraction of their original abundance.
Back then, it was really barren. There were just stumps, no trees. They cut every tree down that was going to be of any value to them. And it was, of course, at that time that people began to think, what do we do now? The trees are gone.
The loss of trees wasn't just a problem for the forest products industry. Forests provide a whole host of ecosystem services for people and the environment. They store carbon, filter the watershed, and play an important role in providing clean air. Forests are not just communities of trees. They are complex ecosystems that include many thousands of plants as well as a vast variety of animal life.
What you saw during the period of the 19th century is we completely depleted our northern forests across the entire state of Michigan, which led to everything from the silting in of our rivers and the extirpation of many species, including some charismatic species like the grayling. We had the only Midwest population of Arctic grayling in the Great Lakes.
Throughout the 20th century, conservationists and government agencies worked hard to restore forest habitats throughout the Great Lakes Basin, planting millions of trees and creating nature preserves that are now home to many state and federal endangered species, like the bald eagle.
An awful lot of birds that come through this area. Many of them, of course, are migrating through to Canada. But there's an awful lot of wildlife, birds included, that take up residence in the Upper Peninsula. And yes, it does speak to the quality of the woods and the water of our area.
But with most land in the Great Lakes region owned by private landowners and timber companies, forest conservation requires much more than protecting a few small preserve areas. These days, conservationists, foresters, and loggers must work together to develop land management plans that allow for sustainable timber harvesting that keeps large tracts of forests intact. One conservation strategy in full display is found on the Nature Conservancy's Two-Hearted River Forest Reserve in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Here, John Fosgett is conducting research to determine the best ways to harvest timber without damaging the environment.
Can you have conservation value in a managed forest too? So the hypothesis is that through utilizing the techniques that we're developing, we can have a healthy, diverse forest and still provide a sustainable source of timber and jobs to the economy in Michigan.
Foresters like Nick Munkovich take that research and work with loggers and landowners to create working forest easements, developing sustainable land management plans that produce top-quality timber without damaging the environment.
These forests up here in the Upper Peninsula, they produce high-dollar, high-value logs that actually sometimes get exported to other countries, to be turned. Those are really special logs.
Right now, Nick's overseeing a cut on Forest Stewardship Council and Sustainable Forestry Initiative certified state-owned land. The Forest Stewardship Council, known as the FSC, and the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, known as the SFI, both offer a gold standard certification for forests that are managed properly. In the state of Michigan, all state-owned land holds the dual FSC and SFI certification. Certification requirements include protecting the rights of indigenous people, encouraging biodiversity through selective harvests, and most importantly,
We make sure that these certified land bases, when they cut a tree, they use all the tree.
but it's not just foresters like Nick that have a role to play in keeping our forests around for generations to come. Consumers, too, can play a role in forest conservation by looking for the FSC logo on wood and paper products and ensuring they vote for healthy forests with their wallet. But for most lumbermen these days, practicing good forest stewardship is really a no-brainer, not only from an environmental standpoint, but from an economic standpoint, too.
These loggers rely on this forest just as much as we do. A lot of these loggers, these are family-owned businesses. It's been, some of these are third generation family loggers, and their kids are coming up in it too. So they want to make sure that there's wood to cut too.
Unfortunately, it's not just the timber industry that poses a threat to the northern forests of the Great Lakes. Invasive species like the emerald ash borer, along with the fragmentation of large-scale forests and climate change, all threaten to once again decimate this important natural resource. The best way to mitigate that risk and encourage forest resiliency is through tree diversity and conserving large enough tracts of forest to provide for diverse plant and animal life.
We know that through past management, our forests have lost a certain degree of their diversity. So we're putting seed trees on the ground in the Two-Hearted. We're creating canopy gaps to try to encourage the growth of mid-tolerant tree species such as yellow birch.
Encouraging tree diversification through forest management makes forests more resilient to pests and climate change, and also provides better habitats for birds and other wildlife. But for foresters like Nick, making sure landowners and loggers are managing their forests properly is more than just a job.
Well, I got into forestry because I like the woods. I like to hunt, I like to fish, I like to camp. To me, it is a big deal to make sure that we do things responsibly, and that's what forestry is all about. We believe in cutting trees, but we also believe in growing trees. That's the balance.
And the Yoopers in Escanaba are glad people like Nick are taking care of the forests they love.
As long as those forest initiatives continue to move forward, there shouldn't be any fear for my children or the next generation to ever not have the woods and the trees and that resource for the wildlife or just for the campers or people that just like to walk in the woods. It should always be there.